Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to speak with you again. Couple of interesting things just to start off with. For those of you that may not know, I've had the honor of speaking before you before, and the topics that I've generally delved into are ones that involve the 12th power of order, of just letting things flow and just coming together and letting kind of the universe guide what is the next right step. And this talk right here, and I'm just chuckling on the inside, so I want to share it with everybody, is just a kind of a perfect example of that. So in my life, I take up just little truth tidbits. Sometimes I do it consciously, with reading Unity Spirit teachings, coming to UnityCR. Sometimes it just naturally happens organically. I'm driving somewhere and I'm listening to a podcast and something in that podcast kind of, sticks with me. And over the time, I just end up kind of gathering, like nuts in a basket, these little truth bits that I'm like, okay, all right, so how did these work? How did these fit together? And so when last week happened and Laura asked me to speak this weekend, I was like, I think this is a perfect opportunity to take what I've gathered and just see what the connections are. So I go back to this quote from French philosopher Gilles Deleuze. The problem is no longer getting people to express themselves, but providing little gaps of solitude and silence in which they might eventually find something to say. What a relief to have nothing to say. The right to say nothing, because only then is there a chance of framing the thing that might be worth saying. So I don't stand before you here as somebody that's going to pontificate truths that I believe are written in stone, and I'm going to give this forth, and we are going to all march merrily forward, but more as just a journeyman with you that's picked up a few things that I kind of want to just play around with and connect in my way to hopefully have the opportunity to connect for yourselves, and for you to be able to kind of think your own thoughts and say, okay, how does this sit with me? How does this work? At least that was the plan. Right up until about 4 minutes ago, when I saw, and I don't know, okay, this picture is, just as a quick little aside, this picture is hilarious to me. I don't know where my wife or whoever got this from. This is me. I'm happy in this picture because 2 seconds later, after this picture was taken, I was going to eat birthday cake. It was my birthday, but it was like 3 years ago. I can this the toy that my kids used to play with in the family room back there. But nonetheless, 4 minutes ago, when we sang that song by Jai Josephs, and I was wondering if we could bring those lyrics back up, he beat me to it. I had written all of this out, printed it, stapled to myself, and then as we're singing through this, the Jai Josephs one. Yeah, I love myself the way I am. I'm like, man, that's order, like, personified. And now I'm just standing before you going, ditto. So if we can leave this up here, this kind of becomes then for us the outline of the talk I was going to give. We'll see how I do, but, I think Jai did pretty good the first time around. So we're going to test out my framing here. And the structure of the talk that I want to give is I'm going to kind of set up a duality. One is kind of the struggle with connections we have in our current outside world. And then ways in which we can build connections within ourselves to help affect connections to the outside world. So yes, as you can see, right there, stanza 1 all the way to the end. A lot of what you're going to hear me talk through is coming from, excuse me, a podcast, a TED Talk given by David Brooks that is titled "The Lies Our Culture Tells Us." And this was kind of really the bedrock from which I started to kind of have a framework for gathering these other tidbits coming along. And I didn't force it because, as Sharon Salzberg tells this great story, of how when the British were colonizing India and they wanted to bring over their golf courses, they had a problem with the monkeys. They were like, we can't play golf because all these monkeys are coming around and they're ruining the course, and they're picking up the ball and they're running away with it, and so we got to figure out some things to do about the monkeys. So what they first tried to do was, we're going to build a fence and we're going to just fence off our golf courses. That lasted all of about 2 seconds. Then the second thing was like, okay, we can hire people to round up the monkeys and we can transport them to other areas, and then we can play golf. And sure enough, it just took a little bit longer because of the travel time, but the monkeys came back. And then finally, in the stroke of brilliance, and the point that I wanted to get to, is the British decided, you know what, on these golf courses that we've built in India, how about if we just play the ball where the monkey drops it? There we are. So this is what I'm doing, because the monkey dropped the ball of this TED Talk by David Brooks in my lap, and this is where we're going to launch off from. So this first part is about the disconnection that he has kind of used statistics to color in about our outside world. And he says that we're in an isolation epidemic, that we are basically siloed within ourselves, and that the coming together that normally happened in various communities of different sizes just isn't happening as fluidly as it once was. And he says, and this is a quote, "Detached and being isolated is what needs to be combated. Over 35% of Americans are chronically lonely. Only 8% of Americans reported having meaningful conversations with their neighbors. The fastest growing religion is unaffiliated. The fastest growing political party is unaffiliated. Suicide rates have risen by 30% since 1999, and the teen suicide rate has risen by 70% in the last few years. We are in the valley now, and fragmentation and isolation is the crisis." And then he goes on to his premise about how we got into the valley, and this is where he went into the lies of our culture. Number one, in his opinion, is that career success is all fulfilling. And he spent some time with this, but I bet we can all understand that something that is two-sided can't be three-dimensional. If you have career success, that's great. There's nothing wrong about that. But yet, it isn't a cure-all. It doesn't fill all of the gaps. And in a lot of situations, as we all know, it can be very fleeting. There's an ebb and a flow to it. So that's the first one. And then second, the lie of self-sufficiency, especially in the area of I can make myself happy, that I can just shoulder it on with me, and I can develop it within myself, and I can be happy by myself. And then he goes into meritocracy, the third lie, which he basically breaks down. And the lie of meritocracy starts off with, you are what you accomplish. You can earn dignity by attaching yourself to prestigious brands. That's the myth. The emotion of meritocracy is that you can earn your way to love. The anthropology of meritocracy is you are not a soul born of the divine, but a set of skills to be maximized. And the evil of the meritocracy is that those who have achieved a little more than others are actually worth more than others. So this was something that hit me pretty hard. In my work, I depend upon data and statistics to help guide me in how to adjust instruction. Just like this talk, because I realized, well, those lyrics pretty much have it, so I'm going to use those. And this first part is what I'm using David Brooks for in setting up kind of the conditions of the outside world. But like I said, there's two parts to this. And if we're going to come back to what David Brooks is saying and the disconnections we have in the outside world, we first need to examine and heal disconnections we may have on the inside, which is where I want to bring forward the Bible story of the prodigal son. And this came because Josh and Mary taught the prodigal son to the children a couple of Sundays ago, and my son and daughter took that, and we were able to talk through it. But I knew that there was a lot more that they were getting to that at the present moment they couldn't quite voice, because in developmental in our own development, knowledge comes before maturity. We know something before we can accurately voice it many, many times. So I looked up the quick metaphysical summary of the prodigal son from Dr. Bill Holton, a metaphysician. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly give a summary of that story here that I'm sure most of us know or know parts of, and then use that as a way to delve into kind of how we can work on the inside out. So as you may know, a father has two sons. The youngest son wants his inheritance right then and there. So the father splits his property in two and gives the youngest son's half to him. He gives his inheritance to them. The youngest son then goes and squanders his inheritance in a far-off land, and then, desperate, comes home to see if his father would hire him as a servant. The father welcomes him back and throws a huge gala to honor his return, which angers the oldest son, who never left and always did the right thing by his father and doesn't think it's right for his father to treat his youngest son this way for his actions. Is that ringing a bell? Yes. So now, here's where we can delve into the metaphysics of it all. For the youngest son, he represents how material wealth can manifest, and we can lose our connection to spirit. The far-off land I referenced a couple seconds ago is that land of material possessions where we can feel disconnected from our Christ nature. We lose connection with the infinite. And it's only when we return back to our own Christ nature that we can truly be fulfilled. And so it is, in one way, a reminder to always use the power of prayer and affirmations and denials, especially when things are going good. It's okay to have things go well. And it's also important, as you can see from the prodigal son here, to have things be always in perspective so that you can always stay tied to your Christ nature, to our Christ nature. And so then, with the older son, his representation is the fact that we may have abundance all around us that we just don't access and we just don't see. You know, the oldest son never asked for his inheritance. He stayed with his father, he obeyed his father, but he never got what was rightfully his. So just in the exact opposite, the exact dichotomy from the youngest son, the oldest son is there with everything at his disposal, and he doesn't ask for it. He doesn't utilize it. He doesn't tap into it, and thus feels very angry when the youngest son does, squanders it, comes back, and then instantly is welcomed by open arms. But that right there is a third lesson, a little tidbit to take from the prodigal son. And I'm also kind of borrowing from the Buddhist teacher Joseph Goldstein. And that is, and I've found this especially like within my own meditation practice, is that the moment you catch yourself doing something in error, for example, so like going to my meditation practice, as I'm practicing my meditation, and it is called a practice for a reason, you know, that's why we do this. If I find myself wandering and I've lost complete, attachment to the breath, and I've just let myself be carried away by my thoughts, then when I realize that and I come back to the breath, there is this little nugget of resentment and of kicking myself of like, how did I let this happen? All I had to do was keep focused on the breath. But all our brain wants to do is think thoughts. And so what Joseph Goldstein is saying, give yourself in that nanosecond where you catch yourself and you bring yourself back to your Christ nature, bring yourself, in this case, to the breath, bring yourself back to the path you want to be on, your true path. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself that moment of grace of saying, you know what? Yeah, I wandered away. I let my brain just carry me away. It happens. I'm in this human condition here. But you know what? I caught it. That's to be celebrated. And that's what he's really going for here. So just like the father in the prodigal son story, the father does not waste any time welcoming his youngest son back and having this huge gala, this huge feast for him. Christ knows, and we know in our own truth that we're all one. And so just by the mere act that you've caught yourself in separation or in disconnection, that's not something to browbeat yourself for. It's something to just calmly, passionately, compassionately understand, accept, and now you're right. And now we can go forward. How are we doing so far with our lyrics? I'm on stanza 2 now, with dabbling in stanza 3. So with November, and I love the 12 powers, and I've really tried to spend some time researching and learning them and applying them in my own life. I've learned that November is the month symbol that characterizes the 12th power of elimination. So to carry that forward, that's what Dr. Bill Holton is saying here from the prodigal son. Eliminate any thought of separation between you and God. In the story, while the prodigal son is yet far off, his father sees him. That means even though we forget our oneness with our Christ nature, the God presence within us welcomes us and makes omnipresent substance available. All we have to do is honor our God-mind connection. There is absolutely no separation in spirit, only the perception of separation we create. So as we're healing that or coming back to the right nature of that perception, we can apply it to our outside world, which we'll get to in a little bit. And then second and lastly, release any thoughts of envy or jealousy and know that you are worthy. The oldest son, who stayed with the father all along, represents our moralistic and judgmental poverty consciousness. Like him, we believe in lack because we block our abundance with our doubts, fears, faithlessness, impatience, jealousy, and any other form of error consciousness which separates us from enjoying the abundance we can have. All we have to do is ask, believe in our worthiness to receive, and enjoy our prosperity. So how can we take this going forward and reconnecting with what may seem as a broken outside world in some regards? And so here's a little trick that I have done myself to help me. Some of you may, if you've seen me listening to other Unity speakers, I'll usually be taking notes on my phone, and I use an app called Google Note, which just allows me to jot down the little tidbits again, the little, acorns in the basket that I want to carry forward. And some of these tidbits are in alignment, again, with what we're talking about today. So just as a quick review, going back several weeks when Ben Jameson was here, he says, it is not what we do that gives us meaning and purpose, but why we do it. It's not the action, but the belief behind it. When Josh and Mary had the platform here and we're talking about whose business is what business, they mentioned, when I'm either in your business or God's business, I'm not in my business, which creates separation. And then when Sandra McKinney was last here and she gave her palms up talk, the part that really stuck to me was, the whole of society is a conspiracy to keep us from becoming our true selves. So these kind of have strung together for me in ways that I can always monitor. All right, how am I in connection with my true nature? Is there any separation that I know that I can heal so that I can go out into the world with the people that I interact with and the travels that I do and be able to put forth that connection there? Which then gets me back to, okay, so what's the real work? And for me, there's a poem that I want to share with you that is always just a good reminder of how we have that internal motivation to do just what I said. It's by Marge Piercy, and it's entitled, To Be of Use. The people I love the best jump into work head first without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn, they're put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. And so as I finish here, what I want to give to you is this belief that we all want work that is real. And the real work for us lies, or at least coming from me and trying to connect all of these together, comes from the work in self-compassion and in loving kindness. You know, those times in which you do have, troubles and ills that are befalling you, and it is a tough time in that moment, and you just can put your hand over your heart, or you can just simply cross your arms and you just tell yourself it's okay. I often think about what Joseph Goldstein said, is that what would you want the divine to say to you in those moments of struggle? What would ease your heart if God could speak to you the words that you want to hear? And it's in that kind of contemplation that I think there can be some good footholds for people going forward. And I know I continually work on, okay, what do I want to hear in this moment of struggle? What's going to help me push forward? How can I heal any connections through those words in my daily thoughts and my daily practices? And so I circle back to David Brooks here, and he gives a great quote from Captain Corelli's Mandolin. And it's the scene in which the old man says, "Love itself is whatever is left whenever being in love is burned away. We were each a tree, and our roots grew together under the ground until we realized that we were one tree and not two. You are who you are when your ego doesn't have to perform for anyone. Let all of that ego crumble away." There's a mother who was talking about, what it was like to have her first child, and she said, that I love that child more than evolution required. And I think that's a good line to base our next steps on. What is more than evolution requires? What can we do in our own connections to Spirit, knowing that we are perfect just as we are, to go out and weave ourselves into the world and help make more connections out there? Thank you very much.